think I have class. I am in my home office, so I am recording today chapter 3 for everyone who is both at home and at school so that you guys can get a chance to listen to me read through the computer as well and see how to get a hold of these videos when you are not with me. So I've probably already introduced you to how to do this, and I can go ahead and get started. So we're going to read chapter 3. So please open up your washed up books to page 28. And as you can kind of figure as a story goes, and we're going to be talking about something called Plot Mountain, but as a story goes, you've got the introduction and you've got the rising action, and then you kind of have the peak at the very top, and then you've got the, which is where the climax is, and then you have the problem solving and kind of coming back down, and then you have the resolution. So we're kind of going on that roller coaster with the book today, and we're kind of close to that peak. So let's see what happens today. Chapter 3. In her white silk jumpsuit with a paw print across the front, Berry Blue looked radiant and rested. "It's a lovely morning on Washed Up," she said, and then her face dropped theatrically. "But not for everyone. Welcome to day 15. I'm going to pause there for just a second because we are now 15 days into this reality show, and it doesn't really, it's not very clear how they go from day 1 to day 15. So they're really just pinpointing important things that happen along the way. The morning had come like a sauna for the Walpoles. Hot, damp, suffocating. It was their second week on the island, but there was no getting used to the cramped sleeping quarters or the darkness. They hadn't seen the sky in days. "I have to brush my teeth," complained Mrs. Walpole. She had felt nauseous all night after drinking scummy water from a standing pool. Their water rations were almost down to nothing, but nevertheless, Oliver handed his mother the thermos. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said feebly. It was easy to lose track of time here. Was he the only one who remembered that his mom's 40th birthday was what had brought them here in the first place? "A paradise island, darling. Sun, sand, sea. Doesn't it sound perfect?" he remembered her saying to his father while she read the application form. So now we find out the real reason that the Walpoles came on this adventure. Turn the page, page 30. "I would raise a toast to you turning 40, my dear, but you've finished all the water," said Mr. Walpole sourly. Mrs. Walpole glared at him. "Excuse me for supposing this would be a change from all the dull parties you throw me every year. Thanks to you, we'll go hungry." Oliver cringed. The family spat had resumed. Worms, bats, and monkeys had climbed all over the ripe fruit that fell to the forest floor. Oliver had built a steady pile of raw fruit, but Mr. Walpole had left it unguarded while they searched for water, and now most of it was gone. It was the dry season, and they found a tiny stream at long last, but Mrs. Walpole insisted they keep moving. Since they'd arrived, they'd shifted camp 4 times, but no one knew where they were supposed to be going. Without clear sight of the sun, they were lost. They were walking in glum silence, slipping in the underbrush, getting scraped by thorns, when out of nowhere a sea breeze broke the stillness. "The beach!" Oliver cried. They'd been walking in circles, and now they were back where they started. They stared at the blue glimmer of the sea, but Oliver's parents had no strength to keep going. They decided to stop and rest. "I'll walk down the beach and see what I can find," said Oliver, eager to get away. "Get us some new matches," shouted Mrs. Walpole behind him. as though he were off to the store. Because I'm to blame for getting the old ones wet, Mr. Walpole was muttering, but he was out of Oliver's earshot now. Oliver numbered the trees with his knife. He knew that this would help him return to his parents, although what he wanted most right now was time away from them. The beach yielded nothing except for some kelp and the discarded shell of a sea urchin, but it was wonderful to be beneath the open sky again. He followed the natural curve of the shore to where he had seen the boat vanish with the Garcias on it, and he hit a dead end. The tide was rough here, where it crashed upon the coral reefs, but as Oliver turned, the sunlight glanced off something farther inland. Suddenly, Oliver saw something that made his heart leap. The Garcias' palm roof had collapsed every one of the 15 nights that they had spent on the island, interrupting any weak dreams they might have managed. There was no rope left to rebuild it with either. Gabriella sighed. The other contestants were in larger groups, with more hands to find food and build shelter. What she forgot, though, was that more hands also meant more mouths to feed. Breakfast? Asked her father. The fire was still burning. Mangrove wood produced so much more heat than an ordinary campfire. Her father was trying hard to sound cheerful, but Gabriella was certain the pain in his ankle had kept him awake last night. It looked terrible. No thanks, I'll pass, she said, scratching at the sandfly bites on her arms. She couldn't bear the thought of any more coconut. I'll explore further today, Dad, and maybe the tide will bring in something we can use. Stuck in a town where nothing ever happened, Gabriella couldn't count the number of times she dreamed of being on the move. But as she waded away, she heard her father groan in pain. Gabriella wished they were back home. How long could they stay put without food? The air stank of salt water and rotting wood. The tree limbs were covered with barnacles as sharp as knives, and the black mud weighed down Gabriella's feet. It was slow going, and somewhere in these murky depths she knew there was a saltwater crocodile, or perhaps a sea snake. Suddenly, something wrapped itself around her ankles. It was just a plastic bag. The tide had brought in bottles and cartons, scraps and shreds. Did people give any thought about where their garbage ended up? Gabriella wondered, or how a person's waste could be another person's windfall. Gabriella's eyes fell upon a dented kitchen pan, snagged in the mangled mesh. She perched on the roots and eased her hand towards it, and then suddenly the sound of squelchy footsteps made her freeze. It was a soft, sly sound. There, again. Gabriella's hairs were on end now. She was being watched. She craned her neck, and through the thick labyrinth of roots, she could see, what could it be? A chain-link fence? But she was interrupted by the squelch again. Come out if you dare, she shouted, sounding braver than she felt. And from a small opening in the fence, Oliver emerged. The Loos had escaped the windswept tundra and were trudging downhill determinedly. They were out of water and conservation when Shen cried out, Look! What had caught Shen's eye was a flash of orange in the distance. He kept his eyes on it for more than 10 minutes, and it didn't move. But the others only had eyes for the heart-lifting sight of the mist hanging like a veil over the tree-covered valley. Cloud forest, gasped May. Tall ferns fanned out. Tangled vines wound their way around moss-clad tree trunks. Drops of water nestled in the axils of leaves and trembled on leaf tips. Everything was wet. But after their thirst was quenched came a burning hunger and bone-aching cold. Mr. Liu rushed into a cave, only to be driven out by a colony of bats. Mrs. Liu picked a mushroom, but Shen made her throw it away. Wild mushrooms in the cloud forest were probably deadlier than snakes. Down in the cloud forest, it rained every evening, and even though they had kept their matches dry, the wood was soaked. For 3 days, they lived on orchids, and other forest flowers, but the fern fronds they picked needed to be boiled first. After 3 freezing nights, Shen knew what he had to do. He must find dry kindling for the fire and food. But first, he would retrace his steps to the flash of orange that he had seen the day they had first stumbled upon the cloud forest. It took some walking, but he found it eventually. It was no bird or forest creature, and that was to be expected. After all, it hadn't moved. But what he hadn't expected was to find an orange harness strung upon a steel zip line that disappeared into the forest canopy. Was this for him? Shen shrugged into the harness and fastened it to the cable. He looked up at the flying cameras hovering overhead and bit his lip. There was only one way to find out. So at the end of day 15, all our competitors had stepped out of their comfort zones, trilled Berry Blue in a yellow sarong with butterflies on it. But is that wise? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And that's the end of chapter 3. We're almost there, you guys. So right now, if you're at school, you're going to stop your computer, or I've been playing this live for you. And we're going to stop and we're going to work on our setting analysis. And if you're at home, you're going to go ahead and pull up your setting analysis and start working on it as well. Have a great day, everybody.